The Story of St. Nicholas by Mildred Luckhardt. Chapter 5. Nicholas and the Robbers. Next morning, Nicholas's uncle awakened him as dawn touched the bay with soft, rosy light. It was the day to start back to school. Nick groaned. It was not that he disliked school, but it made him sad to leave home. As usual, Anya covered her feelings with extra scoldings. When Nick went downstairs, she was putting a new tunic she had woven for him into the big sack he would take back to school, and muttering that she knew it would be in rags soon because he was so careless with his clothes. He saw, however, that she was dropping in oranges too and nuts. There was a mound of spicy cakes wrapped in a clean cloth for him to take, besides the lunch he would eat on the way. He got the bag of coins and, with Uncle John's help, settled it into the big sack. Anya kept warning him not to let anyone know he had it, and he merely answered, "Yes, Anya." "Here comes the donkey train, hurry!" Anya cried at last. She scurried out to tell the driver that Nicholas was riding to Myra. Nick and his uncle tossed the rest of his things into the sack, a ball, his flute, and the lunch, and hurried out to greet Marcus and his father. While Nicholas and his uncle stowed the sack in the saddlebag and on the little brown donkey Nick would ride, Anya came over to retell the bad news she had just heard. She'd got all the news from every donkey train that passed. "Thaddeus sold his last rug this morning. It is on the big train with the other rugs to be shipped from Myra by a Spanish rug merchant." "His last rug sold," Nick exclaimed. He mounted his donkey sadly. Soon the train jingled and jogged through the misty early morning path, down a bypath that led back to Patara's marketplace. "No use stopping there today," Marcus explained, riding close to Nick. "We have no more room." He lowered his voice. "I hope robbers or pirates do not find out that we're carrying a fortune in rugs." Nick kept still, but he remembered the gold and silver he carried. "They'll not take my fortune away from me," he thought. He gave Patara one last look. There'd be few school holidays from now on. He could see his uncle's house on the hill, and beyond it, farther up, the house of Thaddeus. It made him feel sad to see the nobleman's old house. He wished he could help. He wondered for a moment how he might do it. Then he turned his attention to the way ahead. The road led close to the sea. Nicholas felt the sack in his saddlebag quietly and thought of the pirates in the silk ship. Marcus, who was glancing beyond hastily in all directions, remarked, "I guess there are no pirates along this shore. Those fishermen would not be mending their nets so peacefully if there were." As the train traveled on, pine-covered mountains rose from near the water's edge. The sea lapped close to the donkey's feet. Nick and Marcus waved to the people walking the dusty road from village to village. Morning passed into noon. The donkeys trotted down a lane to a short wharf near a small village. There lay the boat that carried things from one coastal village to another and to big ships in the seaports. Marcus leaped from his donkey and ran ahead to tell about the pirates and Thaddeus's misfortune. Everyone flocked around, chattering in sympathy and shouting against the pirates. "Back to work," the owner of the boat finally ordered, and the loading continued. While the donkeys rested and ate, Nicholas and Marcus shared their bread and cheese and oranges and some cakes and watched the boat. On the road again, the donkeys trotted mile after mile, their jingling bells ringing through the sunny hillsides of groves of gnarled olive trees. In some fields, farmers were plowing the earth, still damp with recent rains. On and on the train moved, past miles of white sandy beaches and sheltered coves. Every turn in the road brought delightful sights: orange trees, terraced vineyards, and fig and olive trees. Nicholas enjoyed it all. However, as the afternoon sped, he wished he was at school with his money. He and Marcus shared more bread and cheese, for he would be too late for supper. Too late also to hear Brother Simeon's story at vesper time. Brother Simeon was easygoing, and though a great scholar, he always talked in a way the boys could understand, and he enjoyed everyday things like walking in the woods and watching birds. Nicholas liked the stories Brother Simeon read. When he told about the time Jesus' friends were frightened during a storm at sea, his plain face beamed and his voice boomed as he asked the question Jesus had asked the terrified men, "Why are you frightened? Where is your faith?" That was a good story, Nick thought, as they jogged on. Already the donkeys threw long shadows on the road. The afternoon grew dim as they reached a hilltop from which Nick could look down on Myra Harbor. Ships were misty with coming nightfall. It would be hard to see a pirate ship hiding in a cove. and the pirates could swarm up quickly from the shore to overtake travelers. He looked down at Myra with its many buildings and large amphitheater. Now that night was coming, he wished he could ride to the city and wait in the busy marketplace for someone from school to meet him. Suddenly the mountains hid the sun and darkness fell. The donkey stopped by a dark grove of trees. Nicholas got off slowly and called goodbye in a big, brave voice to Marcus and his father. Before long, the donkey train was a far-off jingle. Slinging his sack over his shoulder, Nick slipped and slid down a path that led through a gloomy ravine, thick with cypress trees. His school was in a house on the other side of the ravine and beyond a meadow. He kept looking around. Robbers might be following. He heard twigs snapping and hid behind a tree. It might be pirates. When all was still again, he ran down the path toward a brook. He would cross quickly on the log and run uphill among the trees, and then over the meadow to the school. But something moved again. Maybe there were robbers with a hideout in this ravine. They moved again. Twigs snapped. Nick fled back up the path down which he had just come, stumbling over rolling stones. His heart pounded too hard to hear if the robbers were chasing him, but he had to rest a minute. He was panting hard. His sack was heavy. He crawled into a thicket and lay gasping for breath, scared and alone. Across the ravine, dark figures still moved mysteriously under the trees. Nick didn't dare leave the thicket. The night was cold. What would Brother Simeon think if he did not return tonight? Nicholas sat up. Why are you afraid? Where is your faith? He could not expect God to help him if he hid here, cowering under a bush. He got up, shouldered his sack, and grabbed a stick. He was determined to make so much noise that the robbers or pirates or whatever they were would think he was a crowd of people. Flailing the stick, he ran downhill shouting, "Come on, everybody! Let's catch these robbers and pirates!" Zigzagging back and forth, he kept yelling in all sorts of voices so as to sound like a dozen people. He crossed the brook and charged wildly up the hill, shouting at the mysterious figures. "Meh," they pleaded, angry and surprised, and galloped into the clearing and across the meadow toward the school. Nicholas stood still, staring open-mouthed. 3 goats! And he had accused them of being robbers or pirates. He laughed at himself all the way across the meadow and up to the door of the big gray stone house. He flung open the door with a bang. Trying to catch the door, he tipped his heavy sack. Oranges, nuts, cakes, and clothes rolled all over the floor. Boys scrambled for the food, crying, "Nicholas is here, strewing things around as usual." Waving to them, he hurried toward Brother Simeon's small room at the back of the school. Thankfully, he hadn't spilled his silver and gold. "I must give Brother Simeon a message from my uncle," Nick called to the boys. In a few minutes, the money was safe with the good teacher. "I will take good care of your money and pay your expenses with it," the brother said. "If you need some at any time, tell me." "I don't know what I would need it for," Nicholas said. Then he remembered to thank his teacher for taking care of the money. As he was saying goodnight, Brother Simeon said, "A new boy came 2 days ago. He's only 5 years old and he's lonely. He's asleep now, but we put him in the bed near the door so he can see the light in the hall at night. He's an orphan. Maybe you can cheer him up because you remember how it feels to be a lonely orphan." "I certainly do, sir," Nicholas answered. By the time he reached the big room where all the boys' beds were, most of the boys were asleep. Nicholas tiptoed to the dim room past Galfu's bed. Galfu was a big boy. If anyone bothered him, he got angry and shouted. He was always complaining or carrying tales or taking things away from the smaller boys. Not far from Galfu, the new little boy was huddled in bed. His covers were pulled around his ears. What a small one he was. Nicholas was almost asleep when he heard muffled sobbing. He sat up and listened. It was the little orphan. Galfu startled and snarled, "Keep still!" The crying stopped. Nicholas lay awake a long time. It was hard to be a lonely little orphan, but there ought to be some way to make the child happy. Maybe a surprise toy. But where would Nick get one? He thought for a while, but he couldn't think of anything. He was too sleepy. Then he remembered the toys he had made for Elena and Thekla. Soon he was tiptoeing among the silent sleepers. In the wood basket he found a piece of wood from which he could make a toy goat as soon as dawn came. When the first sunbeams blinked through the open windows, Nicholas was awake. Deftly he whittled the toy. Before long it really began to look like a goat. He worked fast to get it done before the others awoke. No one must know who gave the gift. As soon as the little beast was finished, Nicholas crept toward the small boy's bed and hid it in his sandal. Then Nick sped back and sprang into his own bed. He sprang so hard that he crashed to the floor on the other side. The boys woke suddenly, crying, "What's that noise?" In the hubbub, nobody noticed Nick crawling sheepishly back into his bed, for he was shouting with the rest, "Yeah, what's that noise?" Brother Simeon came in to quiet them down. Since they were all wide awake, he suggested that they get dressed. Nicholas watched as the little lad reached down for his shoes. He put his foot into one and fastened it wearily. Then he belted his tunic and almost did not bother about his other shoe. Galfu tripped over it and growled, "Get that thing out of here." He kicked the shoe across the room, and the frightened child scurried after it. A boy close by picked it up and went to help the little one put it on. Then they both called out in surprise, "A toy goat in the sandal!" The boys came crowding around. "How did it get there? Who gave it to you?" Nobody seemed to know. "Maybe it was Brother Simeon," someone whispered. "It's a friendly goat," the little boy declared proudly. "I'll let you play with it," he said to another small child who stood watching. Then the big boy who had found the sandal had an idea. "Let us big ones make toy animals for the younger ones. We could make them each a different kind of animal, and they could play Noah's Ark." "I'm hungry," Galfu complained. "Let's go to breakfast." "Nicky," one of his friends said, teasing, "your fingers fumble, but you can make something very simple. Maybe the roof of the ark." Nicholas grinned and agreed. "Someone will have to show me how." A crash in the front hall sent everyone running to see what had happened. "Goats!" someone yelled. 3 goats frisked through the hall, butting over benches and small tables. Nicholas was one of the boys who herded the goats outside, while the other boys picked up furniture. There was so much confusion, nobody heard Nick calling to the goats as, laughing, he chased them downhill. "Run to your hideouts in the ravine, you pirates, you robbers!"